Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to the AFC South offseason recap season preview episode of the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We are going to start with the AFC South champion Houston Texans. They finished 10-6, 4-2 in the division. They drew the Buffalo Bills in the first round of the playoffs, and it was a pretty good game between two young up-and-coming / star QBs in the making. Watson's already there, but I think Josh Allen is definitely on his way this year. The wild card game was kind of a one-man show for Josh Allen. He threw the ball 46 times for 264 yards. He led the team in rushing yards, and he caught the team's only touchdown on a 16-yard pass from John Brown. But Allen lost one of the two fumbles. The Texans did a great job against everybody else. Devin Singletary was really the only guy that had a good game besides Josh Allen. Deshaun Watson was a man that day. He also led his team in rushing, and he completed 80% of his passes while doing it. They then lost to the eventual Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in the divisional round after going up 24-0 and then getting steamrolled with a 36 unanswered point streak with 3 Travis Kelce touchdowns. It was pretty ridiculous. That's now 2-4 in the playoffs under Bill O'Brien. I think the Texans need to at least get to the AFC Championship game this year, or Bill O'Brien will probably be gone. They are one of the few teams that has a real chance at a Super Bowl because of their quarterback, and that quarterback is still on his rookie deal. He's going into his 4th year now, and if they're not careful, they're going to lose him too when his 5th year comes up. And this offseason is going to be a pivotal time for Deshaun Watson's relationship with the Texans, in my opinion. The Texans' offseason began with one of the most bizarre, puzzling trades involving a perennial Pro Bowler I think we've ever seen. They traded away DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson and a second-round pick. They also switched 7th-round picks, I think it was, but essentially it was Hopkins for Johnson and a second-rounder. Johnson has he's had a pretty up-and-down career so far when it comes to his season totals. He comes with a lot of baggage with his horrible contract. Johnson joins Duke Johnson in the Texans' backfield, 2 running backs that are much better catching the ball than they are running the ball. So it will be very interesting to see how those touches are distributed amongst these running backs, considering how little the Texans throw the ball to their running backs. You go back and look at how many targets Texan running backs have had under Bill O'Brien compared to the league average, and it's a little below the league average. The Texans gave Randall Cobb a big $9 million a year contract for 2 years, and they traded the second-round pick that they got for DeAndre Hopkins for Brandon Cooks. So essentially you can look at it like they traded Hopkins for Johnson and Brandon Cooks. I guess it's not the most horrible trade. They also drafted a wide receiver in the 5th round, Isaiah Coulter from Rhode Island. So they're obviously going to take the committee approach to filling Hopkins' shoes, which are pretty huge shoes to fill in that offense. Hopkins not only led the team in targets, catches, yards, he tied Darren Fells for the most touchdowns on the team. But to me, it's the intangible things that I think the team will miss the most. The attention he demands from defenses. The Texans have a decent collection of wide receivers with Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, and now Randall Cobb, but none of them really demand a double team. Yes, you might have to keep your safeties back because of the speed and the deep threat that is Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller, but they're not the same type of receiver as DeAndre Hopkins. Let's not be crazy here. The other thing is the confidence that he brings to that offense. For a young quarterback, having a guy you know that you can just toss it up in his vicinity and he'll go out and get it. A guy that is a monster on those 50-50 balls, and he's the ultimate red zone target. I think those are the things that Deshaun Watson and the Texans are going to miss the most. On the other hand, he will definitely have the most complete receiving core that he's ever had, including those pass-catching running backs. So, yes, you lose one of those alpha dog top wide receivers, but it seems like they do have more of a complete offense now around Deshaun Watson. Right out of the gate, the Texans are at the Chiefs, then they're at home against the Ravens. They go to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, then they host the Vikings, they host the Jaguars, and then they're at the Titans, back-to-back division games, and then they host the Packers. So that is a hell of a first half of a schedule. When you win the division, you're going to get the toughest schedule, and they definitely have the toughest schedule out of all these AFC South teams. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans, they finished 9-7, 3-3 in the division. It was a pretty crazy year for the Titans, with them benching their former first-round pick at quarterback for Ryan Tannehill, guy that they signed as a free agent. Then they finally found a number one wide receiver in A.J. Brown, and Derrick Henry had another year showing he can handle this big workload. You hear a lot about these bigger running backs that maybe, getting 30 carries a game is not really the best thing for him, but he showed in now back-to-back seasons that as the season goes on, he gets stronger and better. So that's definitely good to see if you're a Tennessee Titan fans. The Titans also made it to the playoffs and got all the way to the AFC Championship game. First, they beat the Patriots 20-13 in the wild card round. One of many games where you see a former Patriot coach, former Patriot player, playing or coaching against Bill Belichick. They held Tom Brady to only 209 passing yards, no touchdowns, one interception, and that interception was actually returned for a TD by ex-Patriot Logan Ryan. In fact, that pick six was the last pass that Tom Brady threw as a Patriot. Pretty funny thing there. Then in the divisional round, they had to go to Baltimore and play the highest scoring offense in the league, and they held them to only 12 points. They forced Lamar Jackson to throw the ball 59 times, had 2 interceptions. The Titans sacked Lamar Jackson 4 times and held the Ravens running backs to only 42 rushing yards, their fewest output all season long. They forced the Ravens to be a pass-first team, and it was obvious that Jackson's passing was just not up to par yet. He's still a young dude. I think it had a lot to do with them going out and drafting 2 wide receivers in this past draft. I think that Ravens offense is definitely going to look slightly different this year. I think they're going to have to keep that passing game going a little bit more from game to game. I don't think they're going to be able to, or it's not that I don't think they'll be able to, but I think they're just going to have to, stay away from trying to rely on running the ball so much, because the Titans showed that, if you can stop that running game, and make the Ravens one-dimensional, it's going to bode well for you. And then, as I mentioned, they lost in the AFC Championship game to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Titans were held to only 85 rushing yards, their second lowest rushing output all season. Probably the biggest knock on the Chiefs all year was, and especially the year before, was their run defense. And were they going to be able to hold up in the playoffs when all their opponents were just going to try and run the ball all game, play a ball control type of offense, and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field? And that defense answered the call against the best running back in football last year. So that was good to see for the Chiefs. And then obviously they went on to win the Super Bowl. The Titans used the franchise tag on Derrick Henry and decided to keep Tannehill from hitting free agency by giving him a 4-year deal worth over $100 million. They lost last year's starting right tackle Jack Conklin to free agency, but they re-signed Dennis Kelly to a 3-year deal, and they signed Ty Sambrillo to a 1-year deal. They also drafted offensive tackle Isaiah Wilson from Georgia with their first-round pick, so they are clearly stocking up on that offensive line. I think they know that the team is only going to go as far as that offensive line goes when you're going to rely on your running back so much. They're going to continue to lean on Derrick Henry and try and dominate games with their running game. With Logan Ryan still not signed because of his demand for at least $10 million, the Titans covered themselves by using their second-round pick on LSU corner Christian Fulton. Then in the third round, they went and got Darrington Evans from Appalachian State. He will take Dion Lewis's spot after he left to go to the Giants. Evans ran a 4.4 at the combine, and he's a smaller running back, but he's a perfect complement to Derrick Henry. Fast, small, can definitely help out in the passing game. Evans should definitely catch a few balls a game and might spell Henry on some of those first downs after big runs or maybe some of those third and long situations, but I don't see him taking any of those super valuable goal line touches or those fourth quarter touches when we see Derrick Henry just mauling defenders who are tired of trying to tackle a bulldozer all game. So that's definitely one of the better complementary tandems as far as running backs go. Longtime Titan Delaney Walker retired this offseason, leaving that tight end room to Jonnu Smith and Anthony Firkser, two versatile tight ends that are great in the running game as well as good in the passing game. So the Titans look pretty locked and loaded to try and replicate what they did last year. The Titans' defense was not as good as they weren't as good last year as they were in the previous seasons, despite what they did in the playoffs versus the Patriots and the Ravens. If they can do what they did in the playoffs all year round, they'll have one of the best defenses in the league. They traded Jarrell Casey to the Broncos for a 7th-round pick, which he was not very happy about. He was quoted as saying, "The Titans threw me away like a piece of trash after spending 9 years there." They addressed that need with their 5th-round pick in the draft by taking Laurel Murchison from North Carolina State, and they also signed Jack Crawford to a 1-year deal. So they got some youth at the defensive line. As far as their schedule goes, they start at the Broncos, which is never a good place to start week 1 with that high altitude. Then they get a division game against the Jaguars. They're at the Vikings, and then 3 games at home versus the Steelers, the Bills, and the Texans. So that's probably their toughest stretch, and they're lucky that they get all 3 of those 3 teams at home. So both AFC South teams that made the playoffs last year have a pretty rough first half schedule, which should help open the door for the next team that we're going to talk about here, the Indianapolis Colts. They finished the season 7-9. They were also 3-3 in the division. The Colts' 2019 season was pretty much doomed from the beginning when all-pro quarterback Andrew Luck retired early, and the Colts cut P.J. Walker, who went on to become the unofficial MVP of the XFL. He never, officially won that title, but I'm going to give it to him because that dude was awesome in the XFL. Jacoby Brissett is not the worst quarterback in the league, but I think it's pretty clear that he's not a starting caliber, NFL material type quarterback, which is why the Colts brought in Phillip Rivers this offseason. But the Colts will still be a run-first team. Last year, they were 5th in rushing yards per game, 4th in rushing attempts. They were 2nd in rushing first downs per game. The Colts gave the ball to their trio of runners and let that top 5 offensive line do their thing. But they had the 3rd fewest passing yards per game and the 4th lowest completion percentage, the 4th lowest passing touchdown percentage. So Phillip Rivers will certainly make that offense more balanced. They'll probably be a little more explosive, and they should it should help a lot more with these the fantasy relevant Colt pass catchers compared to last year. Guys like T.Y. Hilton, who finished as the number 57 wide receiver in half PPR last year. Nyheim Hines, probably their third running back. He was number 44 running back last year. And then Jack Doyle, who finished as the number 17 tight end. Those are three guys that I think should benefit the most from the change at quarterback, especially Jack Doyle after the team let Eric Ebron walk in free agency. Doyle will have to compete with newly signed Trey Burton, though, who head coach Frank Reich is very familiar with. Burton was he was the guy that threw the touchdown pass to Nick Foles in Super Bowl 52 when Reich was the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia. Burton will try and make a comeback after having two really bad seasons with Chicago. I know he's had a couple injuries here and there, but he did not pan out. That was one of the worst signings of the past couple of years. I think the combo of Frank Reich and Phillip Rivers is going to be great, though. The term quarterback whisperer, quarterback guru, very much overused, but Frank Reich is definitely a really good coach, and I'm excited to see what they can do together when you give a good coach like that, a veteran that understands the game. Rivers has always been a very cerebral quarterback, always changing the play at the line of scrimmage. He loves to just wing it and give his guys the chance to go up and make a play. He's also one of the most fiery quarterbacks we've ever seen as far as trash talking goes. You've seen highlights of him trash talking defensive linemen and everything, but he doesn't swear, so it's kind of weird hearing him saying things like "dog gannet" and stuff like that. But I think besides going to Tampa Bay, Phillip Rivers coming to Indianapolis is probably the best spot for him. The Colts made a big trade before the draft. They sent their first-round pick to the 49ers for defensive tackle DeForest Buckner. This was somewhat confusing to me because Indy's rush defense was actually pretty good last year. They allowed the fifth fewest rushing yards per game and the third fewest rushing touchdowns. But they were middle of the pack in scoring defense and sacks, so maybe that's why they felt like they needed to upgrade that defensive line, and they must not have liked any of the D tackles in the draft for them to trade that first rounder, knowing that they're going to have to pay this dude too. So it's not like you just trade him and take over an average salary. This is probably one of the top defensive tackle salaries in the league. With their first pick at number 34 overall, they took wide receiver Michael Pittman from USC, which as a Jet fan killed me. I was really hoping he was going to fall to the middle of the second round. Hopefully the Jets were going to be able to pick him up, but the Jets got Denzel Mims, and it's all good. He'll be looked at as the Colts' number 2 wide receiver, but I would not be surprised if after this season Pittman is the top dog in Indy, with T.Y. kind of getting up there in age. And, he's not one of these prototypical big-bodied wide receivers. He's kind of one of these smaller guys. They got another wide receiver in the 6th round as well with Desmond Patman, who played with Gardner Minshew at Washington State in that air raid offense. So they'll have some new weapons at wide receiver to go with T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell and Zach Pascal. But the biggest move in the draft that the Colts made was at number 41 overall. When they selected in the second round, they took running back Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. Taylor was probably the most traditional workhorse-type running back in the draft. He showed in college that he can handle an NFL workload, and he's a perfect match for that offensive line. He's a better back than Marlon Mack, although he probably has the same receiving chops that Mack does, which haven't been all that great. But one thing that Phillip Rivers has always done well is get his running backs the ball in space. He loves to, if the play's not there, he's just going to dump it off to his running backs and let them pick up some easy yardage. So we'll see how these running backs play into the Colts passing game. Nyheim Hines probably stands to get the most targets out of the group, but he's got to be on the field to catch the ball. So Marlon Mack is going into his 4th year, so the team can ride him this season, decline his 5th-year option after 2020, and then have Jonathan Taylor ready to go. Or maybe a team has a big need at running back midway through the season, and the Colts feel like Jonathan Taylor is ready to take over as the lead back, and they use Marlon Mack as trade bait. So this pick definitely gives them some options. Running back was probably not one of their bigger needs, but Jonathan Taylor is a different kind of dude. So you put him with that offensive line, and it should be a lot of fun to watch. The Colts are a very interesting team to me in 2020. A decent defense, a great offensive line with a good group of running backs, a pretty solid wide receiver core with an above-average group of tight ends, a potential Hall of Fame quarterback in Phillip Rivers, and a really good coach. So they got all the ingredients to have a good team, and I'm not sleeping on the Colts this year at all. Their key schedule stretch starts to me in Week 9 versus the Ravens. Then they're at the Titans. They are at home against the Packers, then at home against the Titans again, and then they are at the Texans Week 13. So 3 division games over the span of 5 weeks with the Ravens and the Packers mixed in there. Definitely not easy, but out of the 4 teams in the AFC South, they probably have one of the easier schedules. So that bodes well for you Colt fans out there. And last but not least, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars out of Duval. 6-10 last year. They only finished 2-4 in the division. The Jags' 2019 season did not go as planned in any way. Free agent darling quarterback Nick Foles only played in 2 games after a broken collarbone, I think it was. Pro Bowl cornerback Jalen Ramsey demanded to be traded, and he faked a back injury to make it happen. There were rumors that the team was going to maybe move to London. It was just a fiasco in Jacksonville. They had a massive fall from grace from playing in the AFC Championship game in 2017 to picking in the top 10 in 2020. They are the perfect example of what happens when you have a team that has everything except a quarterback, but then they still try and just throw money at the quarterback that they had on the roster. Blake Bortles kept that team from winning it all, in my opinion. It's a shame to see that old school type of, run the ball, play defense, complementary football kind of just fall apart because of the tensions between players and management. They have pretty much been a circus since Pocket Hercules Maurice Jones-Drew left in 2013. The one bright spot for the Jags, though, last year was the play of their 6th-round pick, Gardner Minshew. The team traded away Nick Foles this offseason, so that leaves Minshew as the lead dog there in the quarterback room, and he'll have every opportunity to be the starter going into this season. I think I saw they brought in Mike Glennon to back him up, so not much of a threat there for Gardner. And you put yourself in a good position when you have a 6th-round pick starting at quarterback and actually playing pretty well. They started their offseason by trading away Calais Campbell to the Ravens for a 5th-round pick, and they used their franchise tag on Yannick Ngakoue. A lot of insiders were expecting him to get traded on draft night or day or two before draft night because of how vocal he's been about not wanting to play in Jacksonville. In 2020, he's made multiple Twitter posts and even went on ESPN and said, it's time for us to move on. He's just not happy. He was even in like a Twitter beef with the owner's son or something like that. Just stupid. The Jags also traded cornerback A.J. Boye to the Broncos for a 4th-round pick before the draft. And then, that kind of set them up with a whole bunch of extra picks, but it definitely gutted their defense. So they did add some players via free agency, including 2 defensive linemen, Al Woods and Rodney Gunter, 2 veteran defensive tackles. They also signed 2 linebackers, Joe Schubert and Rashawn Melvin, to try and fill that gap left by Telvin Smith, who retired in 2018 after leading the team in solo tackles and combined tackles in 2017. He has gotten himself into some legal issues since retiring. I think he's getting a little too comfortable with a couple underage girls. But we won't get into that. Continuing to build the defense was obviously the priority for the Jaguars heading into the draft. They used 6 of their first 8 picks on defensive players. First, they got a cornerback to replace Ramsey and Boye in C.J. Henderson from Florida. He was the consensus number 2 cornerback in the draft, and at 6'1", 200 pounds with elite man coverage ability, he's kind of a spinning image of Ramsey. Ramsey was 6'1", I think 196 pounds. Then later in the first round, since they had 2 first-rounders, they took an edge rusher from LSU, Clevion Chason, to join the rotation of Yannick Ngakoue and the first-round pick from last year, Josh Allen. If they do end up trading Ngakoue, then Kayson would probably be their starting left defensive end. Their second-round pick, wide receiver Laviska Shenault, seems to be a great fit with Gardner Minshew and the offense in Jacksonville, which will be built around Gardner Minshew's strengths. He's super versatile. He took snaps as a wildcat quarterback. He was handed the ball as a traditional running back out of the I formation. He played both inside receiver, outside receiver. He lined up as a tight end a bunch. So he's definitely a super versatile guy, and he's an absolute dog when he gets the ball in his hands. If you want some fun watch, go watch his highlights. He apparently got offers to go to places like Alabama and Clemson, but he wanted to go somewhere that wasn't on the map yet, as he said it. So that's why he went out to Colorado. In the third round, then the Jaguars they took a run stuffer, defensive tackle from Ohio State, Devon Hamilton. And then they went with an offensive lineman in the beginning of the fourth round, but then they took another cornerback and another linebacker with the pair of fourth-round picks that they got for the trades of A.J. Boye and Nick Foles. So they definitely had a plan going into the draft. They accumulated a bunch of draft picks. They made 12 picks altogether. I think they made the third or fourth most selections in the draft. The Jags are going to be a very young team in 2020 and probably won't do much better than 7-9. But they look like their rebuild will continue to focus on playing good defense and leaning on Leonard Fournette if they don't trade him, and that running game, and try not to rely on their young quarterback too much. Their toughest stretch of games starts in Week 9 versus the Texans. Then they're at the Packers. And then they're at home against the Steelers and at home against the Browns, which the Browns look like a pretty average team right now. But come Week 12, if that offensive line there and their defense is playing better, I think the Browns could be one of the bigger surprise teams of the league, which people have been saying for a couple of years now, but it might actually happen. Then they're at the Vikings in Week 13. They're at home against the Titans, and then they're at the Ravens in Week 15. So they also start and end with the Colts. So definitely no cakewalk schedule for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who finished last in the division last year. They're going to have to earn every one of those wins that they get. So that's going to do it for the AFC South offseason recap and 2020 season preview. Thank you again for tuning in. Next week, we're going to check out the AFC East and see what's up in that division now that Tom Brady's gone. Maybe we'll finally see a team win besides the Patriots, which would be great. So, again, thanks for tuning in, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin or Stickin is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin or Stickin is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.